Good morning. Still morning. I'm Alan Solomon. I'm the chairman of the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce. And on behalf of the Chamber and our partner in Spain, Cámara de Comercio de España, I'm delighted to welcome you, those who are joining us in person and those who are joining us by live stream, to this Transatlantic Economic Conference. We're especially honored to be joined today by His Excellency José Manuel Álvarez, Spain's Minister of Foreign Affairs, European Union and Cooperation, by Chiana Méndez, Secretary of State for Trade, and our good friend, His Excellency Santiago Cabanas, Spain's Ambassador to the United States, Inmaculada Riera, the Managing Director of Cámara de Comercio de España, and Marco Antonio Achon, the President of the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce. We would like to express our concern and solidarity with the people of La Palma following the eruption on Sunday of the Cumbre Vieja volcano. We send our best wishes, and we were thankful that there were no reports of serious injuries or deaths. Regretfully, because of the situation in La Palma, Prime Minister Sanchez delayed his trip to New York and reduced his stay to 1 day. Due to his very tight schedule, the Prime Minister is not able to participate in today's conference as he had planned, and he appreciates your understanding and sends his regards and best wishes. But let me say thank you to all of the distinguished speakers, chamber members, and guests for participating in this conference and in what promises to be an interesting and informative program on important matters related to the transatlantic economy. Many thanks to ISA Business School for hosting us in their beautiful building. This event is made possible thanks to them and to our longtime sponsor, Air Europa. This half-day conference will feature leaders from the worlds of business, politics, and academia, who will share their insights and perspectives on today's global economy and the opportunities and challenges facing Spain, Europe, and the United States. We will also hear from top business executives about strategic economic sectors, climate change, and ESG investing. As you can see from the program, we've attracted an unparalleled group of presenters, and I extend my deepest gratitude to all of them for sharing their valuable time and knowledge with us. Our ability to attract such outstanding leaders from both sides of the Atlantic is a reflection, I believe, of the very good relations between Spain and the United States. Our nations are close allies with extensive cultural links and strong economic ties. Over the years, we've worked together on a variety of political and security matters, and we collaborate through various international organizations, including NATO, the United Nations, OECD, the World Trade Organization, and the International Monetary Fund. As was the case when I served, almost a decade ago, as the United States Ambassador to Spain, the ties between our countries are based on shared values, including the promotion of democracy and human rights. As President Biden said to the UN General Assembly just yesterday, as we pursue diplomacy across the board, the U.S. will champion the democratic values that go to the very heart of who we are as a nation and a people: freedom, equality, opportunity, and a belief in the universal rights of all peoples. It's stamped into our DNA as a nation. On a recent call between President Biden and Prime Minister Sanchez, the two leaders recognized the dedication of their personnel in Kabul, who are working together to safely evacuate their citizens, Afghans who courageously supported the work of the EU mission, and other vulnerable Afghan nationals. President Biden praised Spain's leadership in rallying international support for Afghan women and girls, and he also thanked President Sanchez for Spain's assistance in temporarily housing at the military bases in Rota and Morón at-risk Afghans who are bound for the United States. And I'd like to recognize the great work of U.S. Embassy personnel, both Spanish and American, and our military personnel who were instrumental in these efforts. Our Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, acknowledged and personally thanked Spain's Foreign Minister, José Manuel Álvarez, for Spain's support. Today, we are fortunate to have Minister Álvarez with us, and we look forward to hearing his thoughts on Spain's foreign policy and its role in the international arena. José Manuel Álvarez was named Minister for Foreign Affairs, European Union, and Cooperation in July of 2021. Minister Álvarez is a career diplomat. He studied economics and law at Deusto University, and he holds a degree in law and a diploma in business science. Before his appointment as minister, he served as Spain's ambassador to the French Republic and to the Principality of Monaco. He has also served as Secretary General for International, European Union, G20, and Security Affairs in the Office of the Prime Minister. Over the course of his career, Minister Álvarez has been Spanish consul in Colombia, and he's held a post in the Office of Spain's Permanent Representative to the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. Minister, thank you for accepting our invitation to participate in this event. It's my distinct honor to turn the floor over to you.
Ambassador Solomon, first of all, thank you for your words for the people in La Palma. That's the only reason why the president had to shorten his trip, and he has not been able to fulfill his whole agenda. He's next to the Spanish people in that island, and he will have to go back very quickly. Thank you very much for your words. Board of Directors and members of the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce, representatives of the academia and companies, speakers, Secretary of State for Trade, Siana Mendez, Ambassador Cabanas, guests. It is a pleasure for me to be here today. Thank you for inviting me to open the forum. The fact that we are gathering here today in person shows the progress made in tackling the pandemic. That is a step closer to coming back to normality. At this point, though there is still a lot of uncertainty, the perspective for the global economy have improved. We expect growth for 2021 at 6%. Access to vaccine has become the main obstacle for a steady and even recovery. Different degrees of access make the global economy split in two blocks. Those that can look forward to faster normalization of activities later this year, almost all advanced economies, and those that will still face resurgent infection and rising COVID death tolls. The second downward risk comes from potential inflationary pressure that might lead to a lightening of monetary policy. In this context, multilateral action has a vital role to play in diminishing divergences and strengthening global prospects. In our view, the immediate priority is to deploy vaccines equitably worldwide. In the case of the EU, in the case of the European Union, European economies are back in motion. With more 70% of population already vaccinated, EU member states have reopened their economies. Consumption is rebounding and tourism is recovering. We all benefit from the new EU digital COVID certificate. However, the speed of the recovery will vary significantly across member states. 19 countries will be at pre-pandemic levels this year, with the rest following next. Spain will be in the leading group, especially in 2022, when it will be the most dynamic EU economy. Spain, as I say, will be in the leading group. Economic predictions from the government just yesterday shows that in 2021, Spain will grow at 6.5%, while in 2022, we will grow another 7%. This means that both from an output and labor perspective, in the winter of 2022, we will have surpassed the data from the winter of 2019 before the pandemics. These are sensible, even conservative estimates. The OECD projects Spanish growth to be at 6.8% this year. This economic outlook is the result of a strong and united policy response to this crisis, both the health crisis and the socio-economic crisis that ensued. First, the EU guaranteed equal access to vaccines for all member states, regardless of size of GDP per capita. I'm sure in a few years we will look back on this decision as a moment of great solidarity that helped build a common European identity. Speaking of solidarity, the EU has also proven its leadership in the global access to vaccines by being the only region in the world that shares half of its vaccine production with more than 130 countries. 700 million doses were handed to European citizens and more than other 700 million doses to the rest of the world. Still, the unequal access to vaccines by low-income countries means it is urgent to speed up global vaccination. This is one of the great geopolitical issues of our time. Second, to deal with the economic crisis following a Spanish proposal, if I may say so, it agreed upon and has already started deploying the recovery plan, which will help transform the European economy into a greener and more competitive one, based on innovation, sustainability, and digitalization, with a joint investment of 750 billion euros in 3 years. Half of that amount will be delivered as grants. Spain will have access to 70 billion euros. The EU's long-term budget, coupled with Next Generation EU, is the largest stimulus package ever financed in Europe, a total of 1.8 trillion euros that will help rebuild a post-COVID-19 Europe. From the start, the Spanish government was clairvoyant of the fact that these funds could not just be about recovering quickly from just a shock in our consumption and labor markets. They were a golden opportunity to transform our economy, to make long-term investment in our citizen skills, in our energy grid, in our homes, in our industries. The reforms to be implemented will transform the foundation of the Spanish economy and will be accompanied by a major public investment effort that can reach 140 million euros over the next 3 years. The objective is to lay the foundation for sustainable growth from an economic, environmental, and social point of view. A country project that is structured around the 4 major transformations: ecological transition, digital transformation, gender equality, and social and territorial cohesion. Of course, the government will play a key role in this effort, and we are already doing our part. But for this transformation to succeed, we need to work hand in hand with the private sector. Over the next few years, there will be plenty of opportunities to invest in Spain waiting to be seized. As I pointed out, we are already one of the most if not the most, dynamic European economy by several estimates. Whether you are interested in tech, in healthcare, in renewable energies, in batteries, movie production, the time to do business in Spain is now. The goal, looking ahead to our EU Council presidency in the second half of 2023, is to move towards a strong European Union that leaves no one behind, built on the bedrock of strong welfare states that underpin our social models and what it means to be European. That is why we have to keep moving forward to an increasingly social union and keep building on the foundation of the Gothenburg and Porto Summit. The European pillar of social rights must become, in law and in practice, a fundamental pillar of our union. Reinforcing this great success of the European Union also means completing some of the achievements of European integration that remain incomplete, namely the Economic and Monetary Union and the common migration and asylum policy, while at the same time tackling new priorities such as European Health Union. Secondly, there are two priorities on which the Union must focus to consolidate global leadership: the fight against climate change and the digital revolution. The Green Pact, for instance, to protect our planet from the climate emergency, and the digital agenda to keep our economies competitive, must be focused. One of our main tasks will be to ensure that all Europeans share in the benefits of the digital green transition. We must also move forward on the path of further democratization of the Union and complete institutional building. Within institutional reforms, crises, such as the recent Afghanistan crisis, show us the need to reform the common foreign and security policy. Turning now to the state of transatlantic relations, we can say that we are facing a promising phase. The EU and the US are the world's major global traders and investors. However, the respective share of the bilateral relation in the total trade of both partners has been falling over the past decade. In addition, conflicts and trade irritants have been frequent occurrences in the last few years. It is natural that points of disagreement exist, or that we don't always see eye to eye. However, it is important not to lose sight of the fact that we share fundamental values on both shores of the Atlantic Ocean: democracy, human rights, the rule of law, economic and political freedom. We have overlapping foreign policy and security concerns. That is why a close cooperation and strategic relations with the US remains a priority for the EU and Spain. In the last few months, we have seen a renewed EU-US partnership based on greater engagement, coordination, cooperation in both multilateral and bilateral contexts. The last EU-US summit of June 2021 shows this qualitative change. In the bilateral agenda, we have started to work to solve trade irritants through negotiated solutions, and we must continue doing it. We must move forward within the World Trade Organization reform and to establish the new EU-US Trade and Tech Council that is going to meet for the first time in a few weeks. There are still isolated areas of diplomatic tensions between Washington and European capital, such as over the EU's comprehensive agreement on investments with China, the Nord Stream 2 pipeline, complaints about US vaccine nationalism, and the still active Section 232 tariffs. Cooperation and dialogue are the way to find sustainable solutions to substantive issues. Moreover, there have been very positive developments in that direction. The Airbus-Boeing agreement, the dialogue at the OECD for digital taxation, the trade deal returns, and the joint work for World Trade Organization reform are some examples that come to mind. Another one is the return of the US to the Paris Agreement, which creates many opportunities for enhancing transatlantic climate cooperation. For instance, around green tech, sustainable finance, resilience, and transitioning to a green economy. But the most significant progress could simply come from ensuring that both sides' domestic climate plans are as aligned and complementary as possible. The climate and economic leadership is central to Europe's global and security objectives. It also reflects a wider shift in world affairs at a time of transition towards a new international order. And Spain shared this vision. Spain is loyal and reliable partner to all its friends and allies. The Afghan crisis has shown that we have a fluid dialogue at all levels with President Biden's administration, myself with Secretary of State Tony Blinken. We will continue to cooperate closely with the United States in defense of the values we share. Another essential area of this cooperation is and will continue being NATO. Next year, we will hold the NATO summit in Madrid, and we will adopt the organization's new strategic concept. This document will be known very graphically as the Madrid concept. Spain will use this summit to lead the organization's effort to move southward and revitalize the Mediterranean dialogue. The Afghan crisis and the COVID mechanism to vaccine delivery demonstrate that multilateralism is more important today than ever. The preservation and strengthening of the multilateral order, whether in the framework of the United Nations, as this week, the G20, or any other multilateral organization, is a political and national security priority for Spain. Over the last few years, we have seen that these frameworks are not as solidly built as they might have seemed decades past. This realization should only spur us forward to improve and strengthen. Otherwise, we will descend into a more chaotic, more unfair world in which might make right. The European Union and Spain are partners for the US in this approach to reinforcing multilateralism. Let's keep on building a strong and renewed transatlantic relation. As an important American businessman, Henry Ford, put it, coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is a progress. Working together is a success. Thank you very much.
Thank you. My name is Gemma Cortijo, and I'm the Executive Director of the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce, and I will be your Master of Ceremonies during the rest of the conference. A couple of brief announcements before we continue with the program. Don't forget to follow us on Twitter using hashtag Transatlantic Economic CMF as in conference. And for the full bios of today's speakers, please refer to the program of the event, which can be accessed via the QR code signs located throughout ESE. We continue now with the program and with a review of the macroeconomic indicators. The dialogue will be moderated by Lourdes Casanova. She is Senior Lecturer of Management and Director of the Emerging Markets Institute at Cornell's S.C. Johnson College of Business. I would like to invite now the participants of the first panel discussion of the conference to come to the stage and take their seats.
Thank you, Gemma, and thank you all of you for the invitation, the U.S.-Spain Chamber of Commerce. Also, as coming from a business school, I'm very happy to be in one of the best business schools in Spain, from my city, Barcelona. So we are going to review the macroeconomic indicators and also the recovery in this new international scenario that has changed quite a bit. So this has been a year to remember because I don't think it was a roller coaster. It was an abyss, and then as the fastest recovery ever, a human tragedy. So many people have lost their lives, but also situations that were completely different. GDP contraction all over the world, except for a few countries who stayed into positive terms, but definitely very terrible situation on the economic front, commodity prices collapsing. In the dark days of April 2020, how is it possible that you had to pay to sell the oil? And we have forgotten because we are in a completely different situation, but also stock markets collapsing. I have to admit that I sold. I panicked and I sold. Sorry for me. And definitely how the fastest recovery. Who would have thought? I would talk to my financial counselor at Citi and told him, remember that 29, the stock market didn't recover till 54. Well, he was trying to calm myself. So in this situation, we have here two experts, Andrew Hollenhorst, who is the senior economist of U.S. of Citi, and Joydeep Mukherjee, who is the senior economist for Lead Americas at S&P. My institute is a heavy user of Capital IQ. I really like your database, excellent database. So with all these databases and all this knowledge, we want you to share how do you see the recovery? Because it's time to take a stock of this fastest fall and fastest recovery. Is this for real? So I would ask Andrew to share his views with us.
Sure, thanks very much. And let me start by just thanking you all for inviting me here this morning. It really is incredible that we're sitting here in a room together and we're talking about 6% growth or over 6% growth with the new numbers in Spain. We're talking about similar numbers in the U.S. So it is, I'm quite happy that those days when you were worried about your equity portfolio and we were sitting in April of 2020 and wondering what would happen, now at least we know we're on the other side of that, and it's, if anything, much better than we expected. Before I get to the economics, let me just say that I looked at Citi's history in Spain, and Citi goes back about 200 years in the U.S., and it turns out it goes back about 100 years in Spain. So as an American who covers the U.S. economy and works for a U.S.-based bank and hasn't left the country in over 18 months, I'm very happy to be included in a transatlantic discussion. And I will try to talk a little bit about what we see in the U.S. And how that might have similarities or differences with what we see in Europe. And again, I think the big story here is the significant upward revisions that we've seen to the growth path to the economic recovery. And a lot of that does have to do with a vaccine that was made available earlier than most, or maybe really anybody expected could be possible. So the rollout of the vaccine, incredibly important, as well as just changing public behavior around the public health scenario. And that's something that we continue to assess in the US, we continue to assess in Europe, different government policies in terms of restrictions on economic activity. And I think that was mentioned in the comments the minister made, that we're going to continue to see differences across countries and across regions based on those responses. From a US perspective, as well as a European perspective, at this point, a lot of the risks that we're seeing are becoming increasingly external, in the sense that the recovery is proceeding in the US, the recovery is proceeding in Europe. We're seeing services that are coming back. Travel, I guess, is another positive to mention, right? Some positive news on travel between the US and Europe in recent days. We're seeing that. That is one of the areas where we're still below pre-pandemic levels in the US. So in the US, we're really back to pre-pandemic levels in most areas of activity. Even restaurant spending, which is surprising to a lot of people, restaurant spending is back on its pre-pandemic trend. Europe is not quite there yet, and that's part of why, if we look at growth profiles, around 6% growth, probably going to be true for Spain, probably going to be true for the US. Spain has another year where there will be higher growth, because Europe is still getting back to that pre-pandemic trend line, which is really where you want to get back to. And that's the other great news, is that unlike the 2008 financial crisis, where we were really just happy to get back to the same level of activity and then had this very, very grudging recovery, here it looks like, at least across developed markets, you will have a recovery back to the previous trend in growth. So that's really positive for both the US and for Europe. The other thing that just strikes me in thinking about the US as compared to Europe, and this comes up all the time in discussions with my colleagues that cover the European economy as a full-time job, and our economists who cover Spain in particular, is the differences in the fiscal stimulus that was provided. So substantial fiscal stimulus both in the US and in Europe. In Europe and in Spain, it tended to be more focused on firms, in the sense that, and I should be careful in saying that, in that ultimately the focus was the individual and keeping the economy supported, keeping demand supported. But we saw in Europe a lot more furlough schemes, for instance, where the cash went out to firms, and then that kept the bond between the worker and the firm. In the US, we had some of that also, which was inspired actually in some ways by what Europe had done historically. But you had a lot more stimulus that went directly as a stimulus payment to individuals, stimulus checks, enhanced unemployment benefits. And I think that has some really interesting implications for differentials across the labor markets. What we're seeing in the US now is the positive side of giving the stimulus to the individual is it's mobile across firms, so it allows people to reallocate. And we have seen a really substantial reallocation in the US economy. We don't know how sticky that's going to be, and we can watch that in the US and the UK to kind of get an early indicator. Probably more jobs in warehousing and transportation, less jobs in restaurants, for instance. And we'll see how that plays out in Europe and then across emerging markets. Now, by providing that stimulus to the firm and keeping the bond between the firm and the worker, there is a positive implication of that also, and maybe we're experiencing some of the downside of that in the US and the UK now, which is that firms that have reopened, restaurants, for instance, that we were talking about, that are back to pre-pandemic levels of activity, are having difficulty attracting employees now. I have young children. If anyone is involved with children or childcare, you would know it is very hard to find childcare right now. The schools are having trouble finding people. The buses are not running because you can't find bus drivers. So I think that is a next challenge. I think the minister mentioned that as well, that we are seeing this kind of supply side constraint, very apparent in the US and in the UK. The EU may be a little bit behind, but probably as activity picks up there also, that's going to become a bigger issue. So let me just stop there on kind of the developed markets, and I'll turn it over to you, Joydeep.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. Appreciate it. S&P has a long presence in Madrid. We have a beautiful office just off La Castellana. Unfortunately, I can't visit there, but we're always looking for excuses to meet our Spanish colleagues, not just because of them. So let me just add sort of a different chapter to what you just heard. I look at debt and rate debt for a living, and it's very interesting to see how the world has progressed, both economically and also from the angle of public finances and debt. The recovery is fast, and Andrew described sort of some of the numbers. It's 6% growth here, 6% growth in Spain next year as well. That's the good news. Fiscal policy in the OECD countries and much of the world has learned from 2008. So we've all done stimulus packages. You could argue it was too big, too small, but there wasn't really any major discussion about, should we cut spending in 2020? Similarly, monetary policy, it's on more steroids than ever, and we're seeing some of the results coming from that. So those are the usual positive things that one wants to cite about what's going on now, and there's lots of grounds for some optimism. The cost is also there. If you look at debt around the world, if you look at the sovereign world, which I focus on, the debt to GDP ratio, just one out of many ratios we look at, has gone up immensely. Now, about 85% of the increase in government borrowing last year, this year, is just going to be in a handful of countries, the G7 countries and a few others. It's the US, it's the Chinas, it's large European countries. You may have a big increase in Ivory Coast, that's not going to move the needle. But the major change globally is in the rich countries in terms of the increase in debt. So that's both good news and bad news in the sense that they have the better capacity to pay for it than a weak country. But it's also bad news in the sense that it's there. And as a gross generalization, most countries, amongst the rich countries, the debt to GDP ratio went up by 10 points up to 20 points. So if it was, say, 80 to begin with, it's either 90 or 100, roughly speaking. The United States, it's about 20 points. And in much of Europe, it's something similar to that. Canada is also 20 points. So the question is, okay, how sustainable is this? And there is no magic number that, if it's above X%, you're in trouble. If you're below that, you're okay. It's a question of degree. The bigger the number, the more caution you should have. On the other hand, economists like to say on the one hand and on the other, there are many hands here in terms of what to look for. And I'll connect this to Spain in a second. Are you issuing the debt in your own currency so you don't have to worry about the exchange rate? Are you issuing long-term debt, short-term debt? Do you have good capital markets? So most of the people buying your debt are your own citizens, your own pension funds, your own insurance companies that are going to be long-term stable buyers? Or are you selling them to hedge funds who are going to be very sensitive to the first sign of tapering from the US? There are many other considerations that can go on and on and on, but basically the profile of the debt is very important. And luckily, Spain and the US both have an excellent profile because you have the euro and you have deep capital markets, and in the US you have the world's deepest capital markets. But the other thing that's connected to this, and goes back to the 6% growth numbers, is at the end of the day, whether you're borrowing personally or your company's borrowing or a country's borrowing, your revenues have to increase hopefully faster than the rate of interest you're paying on your debt, everything else being equal. And so at a very simple level, what is the growth rate of the countries that are now going into all this debt? If your growth rate is 3% a year in real terms, let's say, and you're paying interest of, say, less than 1% in real terms, which today with low interest rates, you've got some margin. Yeah, you've got a higher stock of debt, but the actual interest payments are going to be modest. And over time, if your growth rate translates into a prosperous economy and you're taxing people, let's say at the same rate of economic activity, you're taxing them, your revenues over time should increase faster than your debt service obligations, and you should be able to manage this. So there are many other, you could write a big equation on this, many other variables involved, but at a simple level. So I think this is where the challenge comes. What happens after we recover? We go back to pre-2020 or late 2019 GDP, and we've heard many predictions. The US is going to be there, Spain's going to be there very soon. Okay, when you get back to there, great. Now you're not bouncing back up again from the shutdown and the consequences. Now you're sort of back to normal health, let's put it that way, with some exaggeration. Now, you're going to grow at 1% or 4%? Okay. Now, that's the key for us, for the sovereign ratings, and I think for many other things as well. If that long-term growth rate is better, or at least is high enough to contain the increase in debt, then you have some space. And if interest rates stay low, as most people think, even if it goes up a little bit, the interest bill in countries that are advanced, like the European countries or the US or Canada, the interest bill is going to stay low for a while. Even if interest rates go up 1 percentage point, the composition of the debt is just so good right now, that's not a big worry. So between a little relief on the interest rate and a little relief on GDP growth, there's time for governments to gradually get their act together. This is not the moment to do fiscal austerity in 2021, but the pandemic started despite the increase in debt. Because there are many other things that go into a rating, not just that. But the other thing is we have not downgraded or put on a negative in many cases because we expect a certain correction to happen later. You can't expect it today. If it happens, ratings stay where they are. If they don't, the world changes, certain ratings could go down. So even in the US, which you see with the debt ceiling debate going on and our huge increase in debt, we have certain expectations of the future, A, that we won't default, and B, that we'll actually do something on our fiscal policy one way or the other. So the world, in some senses, from a sovereign rating angle, is relatively stable, with some damage done, obviously, from the pandemic. But it doesn't mean that the challenges are over just when everyone gets back to pre-pandemic levels of GDP. So I'll stop there.
Regarding debt, I wanted to ask you something. There was some debt relief schemes, and some African countries didn't dare to request those debt relief schemes because the threat was that S&P and Moody's was going to lower the rating. What happened over there, and how do you see that? Because in these difficult moments, I think IMF was clearly part of the solution. What about rating agencies? That sometimes they lower the rating in the moment that the country is on the brink of collapse. So actually, by lowering the rating, sometimes accelerate the fall. So how do you see that? Because as you are saying, the debt crisis so far has not happened. Some predicted that, but has not happened. So how do you see S&P position in moments in which, as I said, if a country has no choice and has a debt relief program that is excellent, why don't I do it? And then if they accept this debt relief, S&P is going to lower their rating. So how do you see that?
Thank you. That's a question we often get, and also people criticize us because of this debt sustainability exercise that you referred to. We are a heavily regulated industry, and our job is to provide a debt rating. We cannot give advice. I cannot say Spain ought to raise this and that tax. I'd be fired. So we have to hold up a mirror to a country or a corporation or to a bank and say, based on our criteria, this is your rating. And you could argue about that. We do not say, you ought to try for a higher rating. Or, you ought to try for a lower rating. Whatever rating you want as an entity, it's up to you. And we cannot say one is better than the other. Now, if something happens and a company or a country is in trouble, we are not the IMF or the World Bank or an OECD to say, I want to be a player in trying to help the problem. It's not a moral shortcoming here. It's just we cannot say that. We just say, okay, you're in trouble, your debt went up, your ability to repay the debt has gotten worse, the rating has to go down. If at that point we shut up and don't say anything, Citibank will not subscribe to our services, and you will not look at Capital IQ because our analysis will be garbage at that stage. Because you're going to say, well, times are good, they have a rating, times get bad, these guys shut up and don't do anything. Okay, so we have to maintain our credibility in the market to say, here's the mirror. The mirror has a certain criteria. This is what the rating is. Is it good for a country in dire straits in sub-Saharan Africa to reschedule its debt, maybe lose the rating, issue new debt, get a new rating? That's somebody else's decision, not ours.
I wanted to comment on that, but I'll refrain myself from commenting. No, because you just said before that in spite of the tremendous increase in debt in Europe and US, you were cautious and you left US and Europe. But okay, let's continue into another subject I wanted to discuss with you. So you based all your, we all based our forecasts on an economic model, in economic frameworks that seem to have gone. So the liberal order, the Washington consensus that was the dogma for all of us, and that we from Europe and US imposed in emerging markets, seem to have gone. Governments are back in business. And we have seen actually during the pandemic, interestingly enough, a number of regional trade agreements. Let's remember that President Trump renegotiated the NAFTA, and some may consider that actually in better terms for Mexico, into USMCA. Then also the free trade agreement of African countries, 54 out of 55 signed that, started in 1st January 2021. And then we have, with all the problems, but yes, we have a free trade agreement in Asia, RCEP, led by China. The only region that has not signed a free trade agreement is Latin America region, very important for Spain. So I would like you to comment on this new world in which maybe the peak of globalization is over and in which we need to prepare forecasts that are often based in paradigms that seem to have gone. Governments are back. Where are we moving? Which economic model? Andrew?
There's so much there that I could mention in terms of how things have changed. I'll try to restrict my comments to just a few points. But it does. So I guess two things that I would mention. One is exactly what you mentioned, and what's really striking is if we had held this panel 2 years ago, we probably would have spent 50% of the time discussing international trade, deglobalization, re-onshoring. And it's not that that theme has gone away. It's just that there's been incredible focus on domestic economies and domestic economic policy for all the reasons that we were just discussing. That's been the focus for within regions, within countries. And when I think about where we're going, I'm not sure that that paradigm that was changing before the pandemic has stopped that change. I think we're still changing, and probably the pandemic has actually accelerated some of those changes. So one I just mentioned, and it comes up very front and center in this discussion of issues with supply chains and supply constraints in the economy. To give one example of how these supply chains work and how they can affect things, you have restrictions related to COVID in some emerging markets in Asia that are leading factories to shut down, which means semiconductors are not produced, which means autos cannot be produced in the US and in Europe, which means individuals cannot buy autos in the US, and we have historically high inflation for used autos right now in the US because you simply can't get the cars, and you certainly can't get the car in the color that you want. I have a friend who was just trying to get black car. He ended up with the red car. But so we should be careful in saying that globalization, although it seems to have slowed down, although it may have peaked, it's still a very globalized economy. It's still an economy that depends on these global supply chains. So I think that's a really important dynamic, again, accelerated by the pandemic. How much re-onshoring are we going to have? How much just diversification across the supply chain will you have? I think you have countries that were dependent on maybe one or two countries for certain products. That's something that the Biden administration has looked at. Would there be more diversification across more countries? So that's one theme that I think is quite a bit different. And then another on a completely different topic, and something that was changing before the pandemic again, but the pandemic really accelerated. And it relates to what you were talking about, Joydeep. It's just the attitude towards debt, the attitude towards fiscal stimulus. How much is there an orientation towards austerity versus how much is there an orientation towards having relatively aggressive fiscal policy? And I think it is one of the lessons of the 2008 crisis is that you want to respond strongly. You want that response to be strong enough that you overcome whatever kind of downside pull there is on the economy. And I think countries now have an experience of being very successful with that. That's what we're just talking about, the success of the stimulus programs that were rolled out during the pandemic. The issue that you have is that results in this buildup of debt. And we have a very different attitude now, whereas 20 years ago, if I said, developed market economies are going to go into a major downturn, you're going to have significant debt issuance, and central banks are going to buy almost all of the debt, that would have been considered completely unorthodox. So when you talk about Washington consensus, right, this would have been completely unorthodox for an EM to do this, and certainly for a DM to do this. But that is where we are now. So some of these ideas that maybe seemed really out there from a macroeconomic perspective are much more mainstream now, I think.
Yeah, so we saw quantitative easing in Colombia, Indonesia, so many countries that they were forbidden from doing so. And also social programs from very right-wing governments, again, Colombia or Brazil, were the norm. In fact, Mexico had a less social program. So how do you see that? So going forward, are we going to continue in this very unorthodox world, also in emerging markets, Joydeep?
Yeah, I think so, because it's navigating with a bad map. Let's put it that way. We have a map, but we have lost confidence in it, but there's still a map. It's not like we're navigating in the dark. We put a different angle to what Andrew just said. Monetary policy, fiscal policy, it's changed so much. I agree. I'll add one caveat. This is a marginal comment. I don't disagree with what he says. Had you gone back 10, 15 years, say 2009, after the 2008 crisis, and you got together the world's best experts on monetary policy and said, listen, from 2009 till 2021, this is our quantitative easing policy in the Bank of Japan, Europe, ECB, United States. What do you think inflation would be from 2009 till 2021 based on this number that I'm giving you? So, oh yeah, inflation is going to be back. Don't worry about it. Well, we're still struggling in Japan to get to 2%. The US has finally gotten over 2%, mainly because of supply disruptions. So quantitative easing has worked. All the academic studies, and most people think if we didn't do it, we'd be much worse off. But it hasn't worked the way the experts would have said back then. And that's my point. So there's a margin of error or vagueness here that it seems to be doing the right thing, but I thought I'd get more bang for all this buck. Now, same for the fiscal policy stimulus. We don't know, because we've had fiscal stimulus before in all parts of the world, but perhaps in response to a different set of circumstances. Here you have the pandemic and then some unique circumstances on the supply chain as well. Now, probably fiscal stimulus is a good policy. I personally think that way, but more important than me, I think if you get the world's top 100 economists, they would say this is the right policy to do. They'd argue about how much, when to withdraw, but they'd agree with it. But I'm saying that there's going to be this zone of ignorance at the corner here to say, how much? Do we really know? Did we do too much? Or are we going to get enough bang for the buck? I don't have the answer to that question. That's what we're looking at. So I would just caution that at the edges, the main contours of globalization that you mentioned, they're still there. But I think the people navigating the ships have less confidence in their map.
That's an excellent way to put it. So we are worried that the inflation is not happening. It should have happened, but it's not happening, which is a very interesting situation. So I have to also admit that I bought again in the stock market. We had a tremendous fight with my husband. He accused me of all kinds of things. So then I bought again, so I want to know when to sell. So my question is, what keeps you awake at night? Before moving back to a positive territory, what worries you? What is going to happen? What are the dark? So we haven't mentioned, but okay, we are in a transatlantic conference, and definitely the Atlantic has become much wider and much more so in the last days. I lived in France 23 years, so let me tell you that French today are very unhappy. And in this widening of the Atlantic, we have not mentioned even once China, which is very interesting. So I think it's time for us to mention China, US-China trade war. So what keeps you awake at night? Usual question. So what worries you? What worries you in this panorama that is this tremendous, fastest recovery and very fast and very high? So what do you think that could make me sell again, panic again?
So from the U.S. perspective, I think, like I was talking about, we have a lot of confidence in the demand that's here domestically, that's supported by the fiscal support that came before, a lot of savings that are built up. So I think your question is exactly on point, that when we think about the risks to the outlook, we're looking at a lot of external risks at this point. One would be a global slowdown in growth in China in particular. It's not that the direct exposure is so much between the US and China is probably greater, between Europe and China, some direct ties between German manufacturing sector and China, for instance. But what happens is if you have a major world economy slowing down, you have commodity prices that fall. Even for the US, which now is a net producer of petroleum-related commodities, that becomes an issue. And then do we have an issue where financial markets are reacting and you have some transmission through financial markets? So global growth is definitely one. And I mentioned already, supply chain specifically, which could be, kind of more specific issues. And then the second thing I would worry about is a domestic concern, but also a global concern, which is the concern that the minister mentioned, which is, what if inflation does pick up further? Because although I completely agree, if anything, the mystery has been why we've had so little inflation. Right now, we are getting inflation in the US, and a lot of that might not be persistent, but some of it may be. And I think we all have to be very humble when we're forecasting inflation, right? Exactly to your point about not having the map, or maybe not having the right map. We certainly have not had the right map for inflation. If inflation continues to pick up, then you could imagine more hawkish Federal Reserve policy, tighter monetary policy in the US, higher real rates in the US. We've seen this in 2013 in the taper tantrum. We saw what the effects were for emerging markets, for the global economy, and also the slowdown that you had in the housing market domestically. So I would say if there are kind of two risks that I think about, those are the two for me.
Jaydeep?
Yeah, I'll add to what he said. I agree with on the inflation point. One thing is just coming back to China. I mean, there's so much conflict between China and the US and other countries as well. But if you look at the integration of the financial markets and just trade and everything else, even foreign direct investment, China and the US are joined stronger than ever. And whatever happens to Evergrande real estate will have an impact on the world because those markets are now open. A lot of foreigners have invested in their bonds. So it's difficult to have a serious conflict with a partner who is huge and who's so integrated. And they own huge stocks of US Treasury bills, which is good and bad for both sides. So I mean, it's a very difficult relationship to manage. I'm not saying it's going to fall apart or all that, but it's just, this is different than having a US-Iran conflict or some other country where the damage isn't systemic worldwide. So how we manage that, this is an ongoing risk. It's not new. I could have said this last year, but it's something to look at because things are not getting better, at least bilaterally. The other thing I just want to mention is, we're taking a big gamble, ultimately, that fiscal stimulus, monetary stimulus. In Europe, the minister mentioned the new European plan to pool resources and give grants and loans to member states so they can spend more, and the digital transformation, the green transformation, all of those things. Hopefully it works. That 5 years from now, we don't look back and say, well, actually, we spent a lot of money, but productivity didn't go up that much. Or, yes, we did a lot of digital transformation, but other things blocked here and there. I'm not predicting that, but just saying we are hoping it works because we can't do this forever. Probably it's going to work better in some countries than in others. That's just the way life is. So this wouldn't be a tragedy necessarily if it didn't work the way the expectations are, but to the extent that we get less bang for the buck from the fiscal stimulus, whether it's in Europe or here, less bang for the buck from the monetary stimulus. The results are not necessarily catastrophic, but they could be disappointing, you know? And that doesn't mean the world is over, it just means it's going to be tough. So we are actually, in some ways, in the advanced countries, undertaking a big bet. It's probably the right bet to make. It's not as if people have alternative ideas that are floating around, but it has to work enough. And so I'd highlight that as the risk, that maybe doesn't work enough.
I was surprised that you didn't mention asset bubbles. And I go back to my selling or not. No, but what some economists argue that this time, instead of the quantitative easing has triggered two asset bubbles, housing and stock market. And so how do you see that? I was surprised that you didn't mention a possible asset bubble in both the housing and the stock market.
So I guess it's only a bubble if we think that interest rates are going to go up at some point. And that's kind of what markets seem to be getting comfortable with, is the idea that interest rates can stay very low for an extended period, which is what's happened. Which is, again, I would go back to the risk that if we get higher inflation and we need higher real interest rates to counteract that inflation, then you can have a major issue. But I think a lot of what you're seeing in housing markets, yes, it's the pent-up demand from the pandemic. It's people wanting to move and have larger areas to live in, given that we've been in quarantine. So there are some kind of specific drivers, but the biggest driver is probably just that interest rates have moved much lower. Yes, the Fed purchases play into that also. That's driving up equity prices, that's driving up housing prices. You're basically discounting those dividends and the flow of services from the housing with a lower interest rate now. But whether or not we call it a bubble, I think depends on whether or not you think low interest rates is a bubble. So it kind of comes back to that. So if I'm your financial advisor, I guess, which I'm not, legally I think I have to say that. But I would say it's really the question you have to answer is, do you think interest rates will stay low?
Yeah, so that's a question. What do you think? Will interest I believe so, actually. How can you let interest rates go up in this situation that is a little bit still unstable equilibrium? So with all the consequences. So I think so. What do you think?
I think that's part of what we're talking about, a different paradigm in fiscal and monetary policy. Is there's certainly a lot more comfort, and I would say, politically probably more space for a policy regime that runs lower interest rates, higher debt levels, and I guess, really we should be asking you, Joydeep, is, how long can that continue?
I paid my mortgage off, so. No.
You are more orthodox, so you think that interest rates have to go up.
I don't have a good answer to your question, just something to add to what Andrew just said. Historically, to the extent the data is reliable, there have been long periods of time where real interest rates have been negative. And especially after the Second World War, where we had capital account controls and currency controls and many other, it was a different structure altogether. It was common to have interest rates below the inflation rate. And then, everything got liberalized, and then we went to the world of floating exchange rates and independent central banks. So now, what's next? I don't have a prediction for this, but, there's probably grounds to think you could carry on with negative real interest rates for a while. There'll be consequences, certainly. But it's probably more likely for us to have that today than if we had asked this question 10, 15 years ago. So in that sense, the world may have changed, partly because central banks are the biggest player in setting the base interest rate. You have large institutions whose investments are somewhat regulated by governments, so you could always change the regulations to say you've got to buy X amount of government bonds if you're going to be in this business, and then kind of create captive buyers. There are things governments can do. They're not necessarily good things. So we may have some space to do this, but no one knows when that actually changes, when that one event happens and suddenly we find out that the market has responded. It doesn't matter what the central banks say, the yield curve has gone up, for other reasons that are sustainable. Hopefully that's not for a few years' time, because the consequences will be huge for all of us. But I think we have some time. And our ratings are based on that. We're not expecting U.S. interest rates to go to 5% next year. And if that kind of catastrophic event happens, interest rate shock, I think there's going to be repercussions everywhere.
Yeah. So in that sense, one could say that kindness and solidarity is the name of the game. So the central banks don't go for orthodoxy, go for what they think is best and is needed in today's world. Even I would say Brazil, where there is inflation, where there is the interest rates have gone up, and where the currency has collapsed 5.3, I believe, right now. So still, even in Brazil, you would say the interest rates have not skyrocketed. So which is, I would say, okay, it's a non-investment grade rating, but have not skyrocketed. So are we in a part of the new paradigm? Is that somehow governments are more important everywhere, and there is some kind of consensus, so everybody looks at each other and say, okay, the orthodoxy would say that we should increase interest rates, but I'm not going to do it because, as you are saying, that the consequences would be catastrophic. So how do you see this new, part of the new paradigm, having governments everywhere? Of course, in China, that again, I see that we don't mention China that much, which is fine. And so definitely in China, but also in the US and also in Europe. In Europe, many governments, including Spain, recovered the golden share in the major companies just to avoid hostile takeover. So governments are back. How do you see that? And in relation with that, then isn't the independence of the central banks a little bit more questioned, just to be very provocative?
So I think the pendulum can swing very quickly, actually, one direction and the other. And the context for this is we just came through, or we're coming through still, unfortunately, a global pandemic.
Exactly.
Where the role of government is heightened necessarily because you have both a public health response and an economic response, which, if your government is shutting down large sectors of the economy, then you will need to provide stimulus and support to get the economy through that period. So I think there really is something that's kind of special about the period we just went through, where there was enhanced political support for very interventionist policies. I don't know if that's necessarily going to continue in the future.
Okay, and Joydeep, and also let's finish the panel also with a positive. So everybody's talking about building back a better future for all of us in a world in which the pandemic has shown so many cracks in the society. So just 1 minute, what else can we do to make a better world, and how do you see that?
There's a social aspect that has to be taken into account in politics now, because every country in the world has a significant segment of the population that feels alienated, whether it's people demonstrating in France against vaccinations, or people in this country, or every country. It's not just this or that. And the political challenge is to somehow incorporate legitimate demands from different groups to be included in the brave new world, while focusing on all the technical things that we're looking at. What's the best monetary policy, fiscal policy? Because if we don't have that consensus, I'm not saying everybody has to agree on everything, but a more solid base underneath it, these technocratic solutions are not going to work.
Wow, to hear that from the most technocratic institution. That's reassuring. And Andrew, just some closing remarks, building back a better future.
Yeah, I think that there is a necessity in thinking about a lot of these things along global lines. If you think about things like climate, which is necessarily global, if you think about security, health, which is clearly global, which has just been demonstrated by the scenario that we've come through over the last year and a half, those are issues where there does need to be some level of global coordination. So I guess the hopeful point would be that we have that global coordination when it's necessary.
So thank you very much. A call for understanding, consensus, and of course, going back to the alliance that has been the most important one in the world, US and Europe. We need to rebuild it, and we need to, because we are partners, we share values, we share prosperity, and we share also kindness, and we need to build this back. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Many thanks to our panelists for this very insightful conversation. The next panel discussion will highlight strategic sectors and investment trends in Spain, United States, and beyond. Stephen Kanner, partner and co-chair at the Transactional Group for the New York and Miami offices at Baker McKenzie, will be the moderator of the panel discussion. I would like to invite our next speakers to come to the stage.
Están juntitos, ¿verdad?
Good morning, everyone. I guess we're going to start now this panel. I'm Stephen Kanner. I'm a partner in from Baker McKenzie in New York, and I'd like the other panelists to introduce themselves.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Xiana Méndez. I'm the Secretary of State for Trade from the Spanish government. It's really my pleasure to be here today, and I would like to congratulate the Chamber for keeping this very important data to start the school year. I think it was very important to maintain it, even though the circumstances are a little bit complex, but thank you very much for having me here in this panel.
Well, my name is Manuel Valencia. I am Vice President of Técnicas Reunidas, an engineering company. I'm substituting Juan Lladó, the chairman and CEO of the company, that has a familiar problem of his mother is having an operation, and he has to be compulsory in Madrid. But apart from that, I will try to do my best.
I'm sure it'll be great. So we set it up with a question and answer format, and we'll start now, if it's okay if I start with you. In particular, we're obviously in a very interesting time, and we've been living in it for quite some time, much longer than at least I anticipated. And in that context, how has COVID impacted or affected Spanish investment in the U.S. and then in cross-border investments generally?
Well, things have gone surprisingly well. I have to say so because last year we were told by all the international organizations that international trade and capital flows and international investment were the first victims in economic terms of the pandemic. So we were surprised to see that the capital flows between Spain and the United States have been quite resilient to the COVID-19. I would like to give some facts to put this in context. Well, traditionally, I mean, 2 decades ago, the presence of Spanish companies here in the U.S. market was quite modest. In fact, we started to go international in the late 90s, mainly to Latin America, particularly Mexico, for example. So it was after 2000, the year 2000, when we started arrive here, especially the big Spanish corporations. And first of all, with the financial sector. It was in those years, 2006 to 2009, more or less, when Santander arrived, acquiring, for example, Sovereign or the BBVA with Compass. And then, well, obviously, the Spanish investment in the United States diversified, went to many other sectors. And so we started to see big figures arriving to the U.S. that became, well, the first destination for Spanish investment, and it is nowadays still. From 2006 to 2009, just for 4 years, $30 billion arrived from Spain to the United States. That were the best years, really. Then with the financial crisis, of course, investment plummeted. And after the economic recovery, they returned to reasonable levels. And so even last year, 2020, we saw a figure of 2 billion Spanish investment here in the U.S., which we think shows how resilient it is, how interesting this market is for Spanish corporations. Even for some of them, this is the first market in their portfolio, for some infrastructure companies, for example. Well, for sure, as we heard in the panel before, I think that monetary policies and fiscal policies, fiscal stimulus, are also a part of this resilience that we've seen, because of course we are not seeing the financial constraints that we saw in the financial crisis. So I think there's an access to financing for the firms, and that's why the capital still is flowing into the different markets. That's the first thing. Another surprising fact is also that even though with the prior administration here we saw some obstacles to international trade and some barriers even to investment, we can see that the Spanish firms have not been deterred from keeping their investments here in the US market. I think that's very positive, but we can also wonder if things could have been better without those obstacles and barriers. Probably they would have been better. But anyway, we know all that investment decisions take a long time, and so we will probably see in the forthcoming months the real consequences of the COVID-19.
Thank you for that. And can I fire my first question at you? Is that okay?
The same question or?
Oh, no. I'll come up with
Okay,
a
yes,
different
of course.
question. I just wanted to make
I'm
sure you were ready.
thinking
So, as an executive of your company, what's your perspective? What's the greatest potential for ongoing Spanish to U.S. investment and opportunities?
Well, it depends on the kind of company, of course, that is trying to get into this market. But I think there is two basic changes that has taken place recently. The first is the fiscal package of the Biden administration. I think this is very important, very needy for America. I live in China for 5 years. I recently returned. And if you compare infrastructure in US and in China, you need investment desperately. Roads, highways, railway stations, airports. Chinese are in the level, and you know that you are concerned about China, and this is one of the facts. And this money spent on infrastructure will be very important for US. And Spain has companies very well prepared to develop these projects, to organize financially, and to keep them on their wings in a financial aspect, so there will be concessions for a certain time. So the cost for the US citizen will not be so important. And we have experience on that. In fact, Spanish companies on infrastructures are the second one in the world after China. So this means that they have an enormous weight. And 35% of this amount of money they use, around 70 billion, that is the total amount, no? 35% of this amount is already in the United States. So we think we have way ahead of very important. And the second fact, I think, in America is the return to the Paris Agreement on the consensus on reduction of decarbonization. And there also, there is Spanish companies, they are prepared for that. They are ready for this kind of investments, solar, wind. Recently, there's in the newspapers an agreement of different American funds investing in Spain also in this field. So I think there is a late trade-off of both sides in this size. Perhaps a third one would be trains. We have very fast trains developing in Spain. After China, also we are the second one in the way of high-speed trains. And America need them, and we can do it. We can help them to build it together, because this kind of big investment are never done by one company. The company by companies of the other country, you make concessions and you work together because you need to provide employment in both sides. But I think these three fields are important. And of course, engineering, my field, that I think will be a large possibilities. Normally, the United States is very reluctant to cooperate with the Spanish engineers. American engineers are very good, excellent, and they try to do the thing by themselves. But in foreign countries, in third countries, we are cooperating with American companies, for example, with Exxon, building large facilities in Singapore and in other places. So I think there is room for cooperation, and we try to strengthen and do it the best we can.
Thank you. May I return another question for you? And it kind of goes into the same area that we were just talking about. What is your outlook? And obviously you don't have the crystal ball as to what's going to happen with COVID, but the outlook for Spanish foreign direct investment in the U.S. in the coming years.
Well, for the short term, it is quite difficult for us to say. We don't have still many data from this year, 2021, just the first quarter, and it's never a good idea to extrapolate those very specific and short-term data. I would like to take the chance to talk about international mobility, because especially every time I come here to the United States, that's an issue, really, that's a topic. And I'm convinced that the restrictions on international mobility are very damaging for investments, especially. And we've seen that also during this year. People may know that people from the United States are free to enter the European Union, the Schengen space more specifically, with the vaccination certificate. The same thing has not been the same to come from the European Union to the United States. And these, of course, have obviously had, I'm sure, an impact also on some businesses materializing, public procurement, but also investment. So, we'll see the data with that. We'll see the figures, but that can have an impact. Anyway, we are happy now because we've just learned that in November things are going to change, and that we are going to be able to travel from the EU to the United States and back. So that's very good news. And for the medium and long term, my forecast is very positive. In fact, first of all, because capital flows and investments are also very dependent on the macroeconomic indicators and GDP growth. And we've learned from the minister and also the panel before how the figures show that Spain is going to grow, to have a very dynamic growth this year and next year. Not only the government with 6.5% for 2021, but also the OECD 6.8%, even the IMF 6.2%, 6.3%, and will grow a lot also next year. The first vice president in Spain, Nadia Calviño, just said yesterday that before the end of the year we'll return to the pre-pandemic levels in daily economic activity. So that's also very good news. So we are going to see that having a positive effect on investments by Spanish companies abroad, as the US will continue to be a strategic partner and strategic market for us. We are going to see also that positive impact in there. I think also that the possibility for Spain and for Spanish companies to receive this massive public investment program with European funds, or what we call the Next Generation EU, which is part of the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan in Spain. It's 140 billion euros, massive public investments for the next 6 years, will also have a very positive impact, because the main axes of that plan are, of course, digitalization and ecological transition. And as Manuel said, well, those are strategic sectors also in the agenda of the United States that match perfectly with the strengths of the Spanish companies, Spanish corporations. So there's a win-win situation to there, and that will probably have a positive impact in the medium to long term for Spanish investments here in the US.
I'm happy to hear the prognosis is good. So can I turn to another question for you?
Of course.
What are your insights as to, and you spoke to it a little bit, as to the role of Spanish engineering and construction as a driver for global or international commerce?
Well, I think engineering companies is, I was explaining before to the Secretary of State, is like a muscle that adapts to different situations. We don't produce things, basically. We think about process, and we change the way things should be done in a way. No? So we find a new scenario that is the post-pandemic, side with the movements and all the problems, and then the changes in climate that we have to face dramatically and immediately. And engineers are the ones who can do this job, are the ones who can rechange the way cars work, planes, the petrol for the planes, or central heating, everything. And they know how to do it, and they have the process to do that. And the push of the government and society towards these directions made things easier, in the sense that everything that was using petrol, basically, was before very cheap, and still is very cheap. That's why petrol has been going up after when the pandemic returns. And many companies are going back to basics, and I think this is a wrong approach. So you can divide the world in two parts. The underdeveloped that is sticking to petrol because it's cheap, because it's efficient, and because you can recover quickly. And this has been done by many countries, us before, and America before. America is the country of the oil companies, and these oil companies has been making America great. But this cannot be any more time. I mean, because then everything will be melted. At the end, we will be swimming in the sea. We need to do something about it. What is the speed of the change? This is a political decision, but this is also important. So engineering are moving in this direction. In the developed countries, basically using gas, using clean fuels, petrochemicals, natural gas, hydrogen, carbon capture and storage, and bioenergies. These kind of things are already on place, but they are in a very limited space, and we need to make it bigger and make it better. And I remember when I was surrounded by engineers, very capable chaps at that time, and we were talking about clean energy, so we're talking solar, or we're talking, and we're laughing, saying, this never can happen. I mean, this is useless. You look at the numbers, and this is impossible, and they are there. So you have to believe in that, and I think in a way. And the other part of the world, the underdeveloped world, is very expensive, this kind of process. now, because they need to recover. They need investment that are terribly expensive. So they are continue with oil. I mean, in all the Gulf area, Asia, Africa, Latin America. And what can be done by engineering companies, European or American, is going to be to the process of executions and the biddings of these projects, and introduce new systems that can make that the gasolines and gas get the less and less polluted elements. We know how to make it. It's a little more expensive, not very expensive, and we can do it. If we let the Chinese companies to do that, forget it, because they're going to go for the cheaper way, and we don't care. So I think engineering companies in America or in Europe, we have an important role of this muscle to adapt to the bones of the new situation. And it's us we can do it. We need the government pressure, we need the society pressure, some financial help probably, because the changes are always expenses, more expenses, and you have to adapt to this, but it can be done perfectly.
Thank you. And so, one more question. So, a similar question. What do you see as the sectors that are most important for Spain for opportunistic investment, as well as for where the economy is going generally in this technology and kind of going to the transition of energy, a focus?
Well, I think that what Manuel explained before is very relevant, is very interesting, because those are mainly the strategic sectors that we think that the Spanish companies have identified as very interesting for investment here in the U.S. So I would say, first of all, energy, then infrastructures, then IT, for example, health, biomedics. All those are sectors that have already Spanish investment here in the U.S., but of course that have that are facing digitalization and the impact of technology, which has been very disruptive for all of these sectors, and are good opportunities for investment also in the future. So let's start with energy, for example, because I think that, and maybe some of these companies are already, well, members of the chamber and are attending also the meeting, but the energy sector, of course, is in every agenda in any developed countries, and some of the developed countries, and emerging economies, as you said, I think it's a must. So within the Agenda 2030, so this look for renewable energy, new ways of propulsion, the hydrogen are, as I say, a must. And the U.S. is not an exception. So, for example, here in the U.S. we can find very relevant players, Spanish players, such as Iberdrola, for example. I guess that Ignacio Sánchez-Galán, CEO of Iberdrola, will be later with us, but of course they became a major player here in the US through different acquisitions and are now, as I say, a very important company in the sector. Also within the energy sector, for example, Repsol with not only traditional energy, but also looking for decarbonization, also businesses, very interesting. Naturgy, which is a relevant commodity companies already present in the market. Acciona with 14 solar wind farms. I mean, a lot of Spanish companies are already present in the energy sector and looking for new opportunities that are going to be for sure enhanced by these fiscal programs and infrastructure and energy programs passed by the Biden administration. And then infrastructures, but I'm not going to get into much detail because you know a lot about it, like TR and many of the big infrastructure Spanish companies that are among the top 10 infrastructure companies worldwide are present here in the market, like OHL, for example, or Abertis or Ferrovial. ACS are also present here, and we should also recall the importance of Spanish investment in manufacturing and in biomedics, for example, with Grifols and more recent investments. So I would say those are the main strategic sectors that are going to also be fueled by new investments, I hope. I don't have the crystal ball, as you said before, but with new opportunities in the forthcoming months and years.
Thank you. And Manuel, what are the main assets that Spain can offer? And you spoke to this in part with the engineering skills. U.S. investors in the current state of the world economy, and what do you think the impact, or hopefully lessening impact, of COVID will be on that?
U.S. investment in Spain is very much needed. It has been historically, and we think now still we need it very much, because they are technically and financially very helpful for our development. More than 20 years ago, when I joined the company, I was discussing with an executive of the German company BASF, the chemical German company, BASF. And I was discussing with him Spain, how things, and he said, well, you are a country that's making big changes, but you need to concentrate on two things, infrastructure and education. With these two things going on, the rest will come. And I think it's quite correct. Spain, using tourism first, we have like 60 or 70, 65, depends on years. With COVID, it has been low, visitors every year. Mm-hmm. And this tourism provides a lot of resources to us. And it's almost organic institutions in Spain. I mean, there's not 1 year and the next year will change. No, it's something regular in our economy. Has made Spain like the Florida of Europe. So it provided sun, provided a lot of jobs, provided possibilities of people traveling, etc. Our goal is to be the next California of Europe. And we need to make investment in that direction. Investment, we need to continue with infrastructure. We need to continue with education. Technical skills, a lot of has been done already. I see for the quality of the engineers and lawyers, doctors, etc. All levels in Spain, they are very high, especially the younger generation. You can see them competing in every part of the world, in many institutions, in financials, technical, hospitals in the United States, they are there. And this is in Spain, so they can be offered. Languages skills also has been getting better and better. So Americans can be comfortable in Europe. Startups, and you know this is a very complicated subject because it's very much limited in different sectors, and then you discover something that happens, and you have to be, I mean, the funds have to be looking for that. But this in Spain has been doing a lot of things, and of course you are in Europe. You are there in a solid, predictable future. Would you have currency situations, legal framework? I mean, this is very important. Of course, there is always surprises. I remember, like 20 years ago, 25 years ago, in all the panels of discussions we were about the Spanish economy or the European economy. In fact, they were talking that textiles is finished. Europe is finished. Everything will be to Asia. It will be China or India, whatever. Europe is finished. And then we have Zara in Spain. It's perhaps the number one company in in this sense. And it's in a little village in the north of Spain that this man has an idea and a process of producing this kind of textile. So I think we can offer improvisations, new ideas. We have an infrastructure, a legal framework, many things that can be very useful for American companies. We are looking forward to have them. We know each other because we have already been working, and we can continue to work in the future. I know that Asia now is the priority for everybody, but I think the transatlantic connection should be looking again, and I think we have many things in common that help us to continue our way of living, our way of producing, and our social network that is very important for us.
Thank you. And I would like to hear your perspective on the U.S. focusing on foreign direct investment by U.S. companies into Spain. What do you see as the greatest opportunities, just from a different perspective?
For me?
Yeah, is that okay? Yeah.
Well, for sure, yeah. Not only acquisitions, but I would say, and that's something that Manuel also mentioned before, I think there's a good chance for collaboration, for a strategic partnership between companies from both sides. No? So not just a greenfield investment or acquisitions, but also these partnerships. As you said, well, Spain is a very interesting market, but it is not only interesting by itself. It's a hub. It's a real hub. Hub to the rest of the single market, hub to Latin America, where we are very present, and the knowledge of the Latin American countries and markets that the Spanish firms have is something that you can find in any other partner in the world. So that's also a very important asset. And also the influence of Spanish companies in the north of Africa. For example, Morocco, we are a first strategic partner for Morocco, which is a very dynamic market in Africa with access to the rest of Africa. So I think there's a scope for collaboration, as I say, and strategic partnership between firms. And if I had to choose sectors, I wouldn't do it, because I think it's interesting for any kind of sectors. We wouldn't be talking maybe about textile, because it's like something that sounds very traditional, but in fact, fashion is a very important industry in Spain, and it's a very dynamic with a lot of future. So, for example, of course, fashion, textile, and covers and interior design, agro. The agro, also a very traditional sector that has had an incredible performance during the pandemic, and will still have an incredible performance in the forthcoming years. Is also a very dynamic one with a lot of innovation, wine and food, so also a sector for collaboration for sure. And then, well, energy, mainly because there will be a lot of European resources deployed to this sector, to innovation in energy, in hydrogen, we said, but other renewable energy in all services and products related to environment and climate change. And semiconductors, microchips, we are going also to engage in European projects to build plants of semiconductors in Europe. Spain is going to have an important role in that. Transport, infrastructures for sure. So I wouldn't know. And also biotechnology, for example, is one of the sectors that, if we can say that, because the pandemic was very unfortunate, but if we have to maybe say one or two sectors that were winning sectors, we would say digital, IT, and biomedics. So we are also going to invest a lot from the public sector and private sector, and this sector is going to be very important in the future also in Spain. So biomedics is also a good opportunity and chance for U.S. investment into Spain.
Right. It sounds like almost every sector
is
an opportunity.
Of course, no doubt at all.
With that, we'd like to see if there's any questions from the group here for the panelists.
I would like to ask panelists their views on the role of the financial sector, the U.S. investment in Spain, more importantly, Spanish investment in the U.S.
Yeah, well, see, that's a good one, in fact, because the financial sector was the first one, was the first sector where Spanish investment arrived here, and we have two examples here attending the meeting, BBVA and Santander, so two very important banks that have that internationalized through the entrance in this very big, but at the same time very competitive market. And I think that probably the experience, the early experience here in the US market helped these companies be more competitive in other markets worldwide, where they are also leaders in the sectors, right? Like Santander, or like in Brazil, for example, or in Mexico. And we are seeing, for example, that they are still coming. Santander, for example, announced an investment this year, 2021, by acquiring a broker. Has the PowerPoint, I think $450 million, so very important investment. So it's a dynamic one. And what can we say about the importance of the financial sector and keep it in good health for the economic recovery in this post-pandemic scenario?
I perhaps should add that in this field, even if our banks are doing a tremendous good job, we have to learn a lot about the American institutions, especially the funds, that they are present in every company, every stock market, all over, BlackRock and the rest. And you see different funds and different things. They are very good, very well specialized, and they're very active and very dynamic. I think there you have a good point. We have to learn a lot from America. I think.
There's good lessons in
with
this.
The Secretary of State, but to say always, I think, just in case.
I have a question for the Secretary. So it's great to hear about, obviously, some areas where Spain has great leadership. You're talking about infrastructure, energy, engineering, and many others. But I guess after all these years of globalization, right, there's some critical industries that we have totally lost, right? And we saw that very painfully during the pandemic, where all the time people think like the mass, we couldn't produce, right? So is there some thinking about, strategic areas that as a country we need to respond?
Yes, that's a very interesting question. Some of it was in the panel before. They talked a little bit about this, like the peak of globalization, what is going to happen with that, nearshoring, reshoring. There's a discussion in the European Union that you may know about strategic autonomy. Well, we say open strategic autonomy, though French people only say strategic autonomy, but the rest of the member states we prefer to say open strategic autonomy, which means still betting for globalization, so for open markets, betting for global value chains and supporting global value chains, and going maybe for diversification of providers and clients, or stable frameworks and legal frameworks to support these global value chains and let them function well, even in hard circumstances. But that's one side of the problem, and the other side, as you mentioned, is like choosing or picking these strategic sectors, especially in the industry, that are key to be less dependent on others. Let's say China, for example. Didn't manage to talk about China in the prior panel, but we can talk a little bit about China now. So the purpose is not being autarkic or totally autonomous, but be less dependent on that, just to be able to face pandemic such as this one, or hard circumstances without having to rely in maybe not so reliable partners. And so health industry, for sure, that's a strategic sector, but also we are seeing now semiconductors, steel and aluminum, for sure, that kind of synergy, so it's also a strategic industry that we should protect. Agro, we should protect the agro, also for sure, and semiconductors now and microchips, we are seeing that is also a key element, a key component of many industries now, and we are trying to work together also in building this industry, which I think it has to be an European project. I don't think a country can do it by itself. It's not efficient, it's not, has no sense. But within the European Union, we have to work together in order to protect what we have and try to build what we need in order to be less dependent on other economies. Of course, this has nothing to do with our strategic and transatlantic partnership, because the more stable the relationship, the more we can rely on our partners. But for some Asian countries, for example, we have to, to be more careful in the future and try to be less vulnerable.
Sure. How important is how important is R&D investment in that, both specifically within Spain, in the public and private sector, and then again in the European Union? Because if you look over the past 15 years, on any relative measure, there's been a real decrease versus, for instance, what's done in the state of California alone.
Yeah.
What are your views on that?
Well, I think there's a gap, an obvious gap still in Spain in R&D investment from public institutions, maybe also for private companies. For example, in the investment barometer that we release every year, when we go to multinationals that are present in Spain and we ask, okay, where are the factors, the components, the elements that you value the most, and what's the mark that you give to all those elements? Investment in R&D is very important for them, and they don't value very positively still in Spain. I think that some effort has to be made in order to have more support from the public institution to R&D investment. But this is one of the axes of the Recovery, Transformation and Resilience Plan. So some of the resources will be allocated in public institutions together in partnerships with private companies to invest more in R&D. I think that here public-private collaboration and partnership is everything. It's completely key. I mean, that is something that can't be done only by the public institutions or by the private firms. So we've seen, at least the pandemic gave us the opportunity to see how working together, we've seen with the vaccine, but not only, but working together, so putting public resources into private hands also, and collaborating in investigation, in research, has a good result. Right,
So I'd like to thank both of you for that really informative and stimulating conversation. This was really, really terrific. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Many thanks to the panelists of the previous panel discussion, and now our last dialogue will include a conversation on the role of companies in tackling climate challenge and ESG investing. Please join me in welcoming to the stage the Chairman and CEO of Iberdrola, Ignacio Sánchez Galán, and Brian Marrell, Deloitte's Global Risk and Financial Advisory, Power, Utilities and Renewables Sector Leader.
Well, I guess I begin as the so-called moderator. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate in particular the commitment to stay here to the end, so-called end of the presentation. I do appreciate you being here, of course, Chairman Galán, and the commitment you've made to this organization and to transatlantic relationships between the U.S. and Spain and Europe at large. I made sure I wore my green tie because I know from it's important to it's important that when you're representing Iberdrola or with Iberdrola you wear a green tie. I do need to raise my mask game because I noticed you had a green mask, so that's next on my itinerary. Yeah, I think the point of the conversation here is around ESG and sustainability and certainly decarbonization, and the organization that you lead from a utilities perspective plays a large role in that. I'm pretty familiar with your organization, given some things that I do personally here with your U.S. subsidiary, Avangrid, but maybe you could say a few words about your company, just as we're framing the conversation.
Well, I think the first thing is why green? So I think probably it's the hard decision I got from my board. So when I joined the company 20 years ago, I thought that what has been agreed in Kyoto is something we have to take into consideration seriously. At that time, I think utilities, the model was not precisely to make green or to make renewables. It was coal, oil, and gas in minor proportion. So oil and coal mostly. And it took to me 3 board meetings to convince my board to move to green. It took one board to approve an investment of 16 billion euros. So it's easy, so 16 billion for a company which normally is investing 10 times less. But I think I convinced themselves but to change the color was very hard. So, and I think finally they succeed. They say to me, fine. So it's green after 3 board meetings. We were in La Calle Hermosilla, in the center of Madrid, and I put all the road full of cars, already green decorated, inside of the office all green decorated, the board room green decorated. I said, okay, green, fine, but green Alcantara. I don't know what green Alcantara means, but I said, green is fine, okay, it exists, green Alcantara. That's why I think all is green. So it's, and I think that was a bit the origin of the companies today. I think our decision was to close all our coal and oil power plant, to invest in renewables. At that time, the most competitive was wind, and I think there were not enough turbines, so we invested as well in the wind manufacturer. We transformed already. A company was Gamesa, in which we have already some interest. It was already Gamesa Aeronautica. He was in aeronautics, and we transformed this company in wind with a license we got from Vestas at that time. We start producing with that one. And we decided to move that one. I think during this year, since we have already invested something like 120 billion euros, so transforming the company from a local utility into a global utility. We are present in more than 30 countries. We have, in this moment, we have more assets in the United States than Spain, more than double. So I think it's our main country, that one, and our main investor are American as well. So I think I spend more time here with my American investor than elsewhere. I think the money is their own, so I have to be here with them all the time. And I think we've been already leading initially the wind. I think we are the main producer of wind worldwide. We have 35,000 megawatts of wind. We are the second or the third largest in the United States and globally. And we are already leading in offshore. Offshore is the new technology of the future for power generation because we need already base load energies, and the only one which is most similar of this one is the offshore. And here in this country, we've been pioneers. So I think the first offshore wind farm, big scale, which is going to be made in this country is our own. So I think it's here, it's close here in Massachusetts. And yesterday, we reached an agreement for expanding this one. I think this travel, I'm coming from New Mexico. I was Sunday and Monday and yesterday in New Mexico because, and I think during these 2 days, we make certain decision, important decision. One to pay the control of all our activities offshore in this country. I've already up to now with a joint venture with a Danish company. Now we have 100% of that one. That means investment of $12 billion in the next few years. So I think $8 billion, which is already fully committed, and another auction we just presented another day, which we have a lot of chances to win that one for Massachusetts, apart another one, North Carolina. And another decision we took, and I think we are almost at the end of that one, which is we are part of the distribution, electric distribution of New York, Connecticut, Maine, and Massachusetts. We have already just reached an agreement with the PNM, which is New Mexico and Texas, distribution company, which is a deal of $8.5 billion as well, which I think we have 18 of the 19 permits already achieved. So I hope, and after my visit, the 19 will be already in the next few days, will be that one. So I think that being the company. And I think one thing I'm very proud, and talking about ESG, is that those that we had already made this early move toward the decarbonization, far from being a problem, has been a real opportunity. So our company is 6 times bigger than it was when I joined the company. We are one of the 3 largest utilities worldwide for market cap. Our total shareholder return in this period has been already 100%, so which I think is not bad. Our shareholders are really very, very happy. So I think most of our large shareholders are very important companies of this country, from BlackRock, Fidelity, Massachusetts Financial Services, etc. Capital, and as well Qatar Investment Authority, which is a sovereign fund of Qatar, of Norges Bank from Norway. So I think that they are very, very happy, and I think that's the point. So that is our picture of it. So.
Yeah. As we were preparing, I said I probably don't need to ask too many questions because I feel like you could talk for the entirety of the time. So very passionate.
Sorry on that.
Very, very passionate about the industry, but I share that passion. Actually, one thing you said that was surprising to me, even as close as I am to following what your organization is doing here in the U.S., I hadn't realized the size of Avangrid being double, and the assets in the U.S. being double that of Spain. Can you talk a little bit about the reasons for why you've invested the way you have in the U.S. and the expansions for growth that you see as part of that?
I think United States is already providing something that for a business like ours, I think we are taking decision of investment with a stand for 40, 50, 60 years. I think we are not short. Investors. We are long-term investors. I think most of the decisions taken, they will remain when I will not exist any longer. Not only managing the company, even and not being in the world for that time. But I think that is not. So what we need? So predictability, stability, rule of law, rules we will not change in the middle of the game. And I think that is what this country is offering. I have having a panel now, World Economic Forum, with the Undersecretary of the Department of Energy of the United States, which I know very well. And I think what has already happened to us in the last 15, 16 years in this country. So I think Obama administration took certain commitment in terms of renewable, and they give certain model of tax credits, ITCs, etc., etc. So he was absolutely committed with renewables. The fact he visited twice our factory of turbines in Pennsylvania, the factory we built here for providing wind turbines for ourselves. So Mr. Trump has a different idea about that one, but he not change the rules. He can keep and maintain the existing rules. President Biden came here and he maintained the rule. He is expanding. He is more ambitious. He's expanding, but the rule has been maintained. So and what they gave already. I'm not the owner of the company. I used to say I'm like orden mendicante. I don't know how the word is. So the whole day, just coming to the investor, say, look, we are so good. My idea is fine. My vision is fine. Please give me your money. So, and I think when they give our money, they make a lot of questions, which I think I have to provide them the certainty that what they gave the money to me, this money is in good hands to be invested in things we have future. It's not depending of changes of ideas or whatever. I used to say the regulator with a pencil can destroy more value than all the managing director of the sector during all their life. And that is what the investor has already afraid. So please, give your ideas, but go to countries where they provide this stability. And I think that is what we have in the United States. I think the states, we are in 25 states in the United States. Each of them, they are different climate ambitions. But they are not changed because they change the government or the governor. So one, they are more ambitious, another less ambitious. But they are keeping the rules. They are not saying one day, then if we sign a PPA with Amazon, then tomorrow, because in Oregon, they decide whatever, they change it. No, now your contract with Amazon, you have to make already a special tax or charge because whatever. No, I think the market rules are maintained in any case, and they keep already this one. Different ambition, different state, but this one. And third one, very important here, is the dialogue. I think it takes a year, even more, for changing the rate cases. The rate cases is how we are going to be paid on regulated activities. We have to present a lot of documents. They argue with another documents. We use consultants, bankers. So, and at the end, we reach an agreement which is stable and predictable, but in a dialogue basis. So, for instance, now in this moment, New York, So in New York, I think I can disclose something which you are here, you are aware, and the network is not the best of the world. So we need to invest a lot. So, but I think we've been discussing that one because they've already commitment how you can make this investment affecting the less as possible to the consumer's bills, and at the same time maximizing the return by the stakeholders of the state, industry, etc. And we make all this analysis, all this balance. So in that way, for instance, they would like to increase the electric vehicles. Electric vehicles is not to put a charger. The charger is very easy. By the way, we are already important shareholder of Wellbox. Wellbox is one company which is going to be listed now in New York, and we have been already from the very beginning shareholders of that. But we try to be as well involved in these sort of startups. With afterwards, some of them we have successful, many of those not, but this one it looks is one too. So, but I think they're saying that one, and what they said, well, here you have already this extra amount of money for investment. The money is ours to sell, but they have to approve each of those investments. For what? For providing enough network capacity for those who they would like to invest in putting charges in the public domain. They will have already access to that one. So that is the level of thing. Once in other countries, it's nice words. We are going to, but it's nothing behind. It's nothing behind. What they say, we are going to electrify the economy. We would like to put we would like to use not any longer boilers. We would like to put heat pumps, but heat pumps means cables for that and need already power. We would like renewables, fine, but renewable means transmission and distribution behind. And I think in this thing, you need already change the relation. That here in this country, fortunately, we have, not always we agree, sorry on that one. So as well, we have some discussion, but I think we have already this bilateral discussion, which is very important. I think for something which we are providing a public service essential, so no one has the 100% reason. And I think what we have to provide service to people who has already with difficulties, let's say, vulnerable people. So we have to try to do this in a manner then these people will not be affected. So I used to say to many of our peers, politicians and legislators in this country, the customer and customer are the same. I think their life will be good if the service that we provide is good. And our life will be good if the service is fine. Because if not, we will have already, it's not a question of who is the bad of the game. The question is, all we have to provide the same service. Who is guilty of making mistakes? The citizens, they don't mind. They would like service. They don't like to see who is responsible of that one. And I think to spend time, instead of looking for solution, to look for responsibles is not the way. And here, fortunately, across my fingers, for the time being, has not already happened, and that's why I'm very happy. That's why we are ready to put 40 billion in the next 5 years in this country.
And just to add something that resonates with me as you talk about that is what I'm familiar with, what your U.S. Subsidiary has talked about here in the U.S. In terms of public persona is ESG certainly important, but the financial performance, so ESG plus F, and making sure that you're making investments that are certainly for the good of ESG metrics and ESG purposes, but also with financial performance. I guess one thing you said in there, there was something I had to think about a little bit to an American ear is the stability that you talked about in terms of the U.S. market. So the idea of, even though there has been changes of administration and some changes that are certainly happened at the state and federal level, that from your view, it's still a stable framework, that the framework really hasn't changed, although some rules have changed and maybe some things have changed in terms of what's going on at the U.S. level, but that the framework has remained, but that differs from what your experience has been in Europe.
Well, I think the first thing here is, I think there are two things which I think in this moment 190 countries has already committed to do something for improving the situation of the emission worldwide. And, but I think I use the word of John Kerry. Then the time is over. What is not been done in this decade is going to be too late. So the sense of urgency is crucial. And the sense of urgency of doing things means then we need already to provide precisely this consistency, I'm just using the word I was in this panel this morning, stability. And I think that is something which United States with Biden administration is trying to mobilize the things for making the sense of urgency. So I think, for instance, our offshore wind farm Vineyard Wind in the coast of Massachusetts, we've been for years already just with the permitting. I think a few months after Biden administration being in place, we got already the permit. And they are trying to accelerate all those things. Transmission, we are making already for connecting Canada with Massachusetts. As well, it took many years. Now they are already in construction because they are trying to facilitate this thing. So I think this is urgency exists. So in Europe, I think we have a great law, Fit for 55. This law is already made on the principle who pollutes pay. Is already clear assignment of resources, clear objectives and targets for decarbonize each of the countries. Each of the countries has already committed how they are going to contribute to this decarbonization. But suddenly, because of a temporary conjunctural situation of prices of gas, not because of prices of carbon. So I think I would like to say that one. In Europe, we know since 15 years, then the carbon price is going to increase. That was the model. The model was how to switch from fossil into clean and from polluting to not polluting. Using what? ETS, emission trading system. And during these years, there has been reducing the free rights of emission and increasing the number of sectors we have already have to pass through this system. So I think if you have more demand of carbon and less offer of carbon, so the prices jump. Nevertheless, Europe has a system for protecting that one, which is the market strategic reserve. It's already a system which allows the European authorities to, if the prices are too low, already to buy rights. If the price is too high, to already to give some more rights free. So I think if they are doing nothing, it's because they are already going in according with their plans. And I have to say something. The carbon is not, sorry, there are any Saudis here. So it's not coming from Saudi Arabia. Carbon is a tax, which is already coming into the national tax authorities. To be used for what? For promoting and avoiding problems to those people we can suffer as consequence of this energy transition. It's not for using this for making roads, no. Is that for electrifying the economy, or electrified because I'm an electrician. So for doing whatever thing, for already promoting the carbonization and taking care of the citizens which are more vulnerable. That's for that. So it's not already foreseen well, like in our deficit is already improving because that is something which is already is a tax which is used for that one. So saying that one, I think is this conjunctural thing we are facing is worldwide problem, which is gas prices. What prices for many reasons. So I'm not an expert on gas, but I think I read a lot, and they asked me just a few minutes ago what is going to expect, what is going to happen with gas. I said, sorry, if I know what is going to happen with gas, I will not be here. I will be buying gas or selling gas. So it's obvious. But I think probably what he's saying is a conjunctural thing because of several reasons, that the lack of reserves are very low, because of certain problems in the liquefaction plants, several things. But I think the forward price, which is already a market thing, it seems that in the future, in the next few months, that is going to reduce. So it's a conjunctural thing. There are not any reason why that can be extended for a long time. So you cannot take a decision based in the short-term situation. So I already have a Jesuit education, and San Ignace says that in tiempos de turbación no hacer mudanza. In stormy times, don't take structural decisions. Be calm, be calm, be calm. Because the consequences of taking structural decisions for conjunctural situation, the problem can be faced is much more than the problem you can solve. And that is something that Europe have to be very much aware of whatever situation which can be produced in any European countries, because it's a risk, the credibility of their model. The credibility of the model ETS, market study said fit for 55, etc., is at risk. If we start already, because of conjunctural situation, making things just for this particular point. And I think it's happening in many countries in this moment, because that is affecting, fortunately, to everybody. But I think we have to look, what is the problem? Is the problem in this percentage of the population? Let's try to use the resources for this one, but not create a mess for the global that happens. Because I think if United States and Europe, we have COP26 in Glasgow next few days. You are invited. Our headquarters in Glasgow. We have a beautiful building. We will invite you. You go there to have a good whiskey. So I don't know what is going to happen with the COP26, but sure you can drink good whiskey if you go there. But I think we are going to have a problem to convince the emerging economies to follow our track. If we countries or geographical areas, we are very committed with energy transition, climate change, etc. If the first problem we face because of energy prices, conjunctural, we change the rules. So how we can convince those ones which are already in another line that is the way to follow? And I think that for me is very important. I think European Union have to be very much aware what is the risk for them if they are not already trying to impose the rules we have already approved by law in the European Parliament. It's not already, it's a law. So
but in that case, you talked a little bit, so the rule has been there, the vision has been there, the framework has been there, but when issues have arisen in terms of the execution and the actual practical application, decisions have been made to circumvent and to undermine what they knew all along was
but the consequences is Europe have to build, for achieving the target of 2030 on the range of 30,000 megawatts of wind per annum. They are making less than half. That is the consequences. The consequences is the money will not flow, or will flow late, or they have to reply a lot of questions, which I'm already trying to reply a lot of questions to our American investors those days. And the whole day, tomorrow I have meetings with them, they will ask again and again and again and again. Why? Why Europe? Why Europe? Why Europe? Fortunately, I used to talk about state. I moved. But in the United States...
I told you I don't have to ask really any questions because you can... But I do appreciate that you've picked wonderful locations for your offices. You get to go to Glasgow for a good scotch. You get to go to...
In Boston.
In Boston,
He did all the necessary to already to have a big headquarters. Our headquarters in the United States are already in Orange, close to New Haven. But he was insisting, and now our headquarters of offshore are already in Boston. And I think our headquarters of onshore are in Portland, Oregon, but I think there are little chances because if he continues insisting, at the end they will move to the eastern coast as well.
Yeah, but I also know, and certainly the wind, offshore wind at your organization here in the U.S. is a lot of recent press articles around various milestones being reached, and I agree with you. It's been exciting to see the pace accelerating, but I also know you're making large investments in solar in the U.S. as well. So I know it's principally been onshore wind, but moving also more and diversifying into solar. You talk a little bit more about how you see that playing out and maybe a little bit of the interplay with diverse resources or where the distributed energy resources philosophy and how that would play into that.
Well, I used to joke always an engineer. I used to say, engineer, we are not perfect, but I think we are just an engineer. And I think something which I'm convinced that we would like to solve the problem of emissions. All the sources are needed. It's not one or another. All are needed. That is a global problem which affects to everybody, and everybody has to put our best for solving that. And I think that is, at the technological level, I think to use all, of course, to put already solar when it's not sun is no sense, or to put the wind when they are not wind is no sense. But I think all technologies are already needed and complementary. So I think use solar. Solar, you are already sun at the middle of the day mostly. Wind, you have mostly in the morning and the afternoon. Offshore, you have already almost, it's flat because it's during certain hours of the day, the wind is blowing from the sea to the mainland, another from the mainland to the sea. And a part of that is already the normal wind, which is coming from north, from the south, whatever. So, but all are needed. Storage, batteries. So I think I spent 70 years of my life in batteries. When I finished the university, I was already a battery designer, battery manufacturer, battery marketing, all battery. So, and I think I love batteries. But batteries can already provide a certain solution for certain time. But pumping storage, hydroelectric, there are certain people in our country who say, no, hydroelectric is not room for no one. It's not true. I think we have already transformed all our hydroelectric, or most of them, to make pumping storage with those ones, to make reversible. I think we invested huge on that one. And we are building new ones in Portugal in this moment. 3 dams, which is already making pumping storage, moving the water from one side to another one. So it's needed that one. Hydrogen. We are already making the first investment in hydrogen in Spain, in Spain in fertilizer, in Scotland for making whiskey. So,
Sustainable whiskey.
The whiskey is going to be made already using hydrogen instead of natural gas. So, but I think hydrogen is a solution for those things which cannot be already electrified. The process cannot electrify. Where to produce? As close as possible of the consumers. Why? Because hydrogen is difficult to be transported. And we have already lines, transmission and distribution lines, which we can easily take the electricity from cheaper area to the areas which is needed. But the solution is not all hydrogen, the solution is not pumping storage, the solution is not all batteries, the solution is not solar. It depends. Each has their own, but all are needed. All are needed. Saying that everybody said, no, I think distributed, you have to put, I think solar panels is going to affect our profitability. We are selling hundreds of thousands of solar panels for homes. Hundreds of thousands. Why? Because that's needed. I think if we would like to decarbonize, we need already to transform completely how we are already producing and using energy. As a whole, and all is needed. So it's not one against another. All ideas for that one are great.
And certainly, this is the risk, by the way, when you get a couple of utility people on the stage, we can talk utility all day long. Can you talk a little bit about the scale of your organization? And I know your scale is quite large, you're a global organization, and the things that you can do at a global level, or you can do because you're a large organization, and how you see others maybe who aren't quite as large or in kind of different geographies maybe to participate in that.
So, well, we for years, we've been already looking, United States our first priority, so continually that one. Europe is the second one, and in this moment we are already in France, we are making already the first as well offshore wind farm in Bretagne. By the way, it's a pity that I'm not in here with the minister. He was the ambassador of Spain in France. He was very helpful to us. Very much, because I think the problems we face in all countries are similar, and he has been very, very helpful, very supportive on that one. So we are in Germany, but we have several of those in construction. And now we are moving very much to the Far East as well. We are in Australia, but we bought already the largest renewable company. We are already just expanding very much there. We are already in Japan for making offshore. Probably next year we will start somewhere else. We are in Taiwan as well. We are in Korea recently. So we are in all this area, and in South America we are in Mexico, we are in Brazil. In Brazil we are the largest distribution company in Brazil. There are 40 million Brazilians which are receiving the electricity through our grids. And, I think that it makes ourselves that we are one of the 3 largest, as I mentioned before, worldwide. But I have to make already just, with being very proud of our origins. I think we been born in the country Basque, in the north of Spain, in the beginning of 20th century. That represents almost nothing in terms of our business there. But I'm very proud to say that we are in Spanish and a Basque company, that we are very proud that the highest building of the whole country Basque is our headquarters. And I think, because I'm always convinced that when a tree grows, they need to have already very strong racines. And I think we like to keep our racine as possible, already connected to the ground, connected with the people, and connected with those who has already been for years supporting ourselves. So, which I think that's the thing. We are big, but I think we are large globally, but I think very touching very much the ground of our origins as well.
Do you see any other challenges? I know you talked a lot about stability, predictability. What other challenges are there from a corporate standpoint in terms of being able to drive sustainability goals?
I was already saying that one. I think when you are a business, but your decisions are already for 40, 50, or 60 years, when you are ready to raise money for the international market and exists a tremendous competition for doing the same thing in many, many countries. So I think the investors will be ready to provide these funds to those companies which invest in those areas, in those countries, which provide this stability or this predictability or this rule of law. So when you are a global company like ourselves, so I think the risk is that they put already, yes, you have the money, but not in this geographical area. I cannot say it about the country of another continent, which is south of Europe. Which has already happened something in the recently. So it's fine, but not in this country. Because I think every morning, I think, your investors, I think the investors, they've already, the funds has already experts which are already analyzing geographic areas, countries, etc. And they are already in what they call early meetings, and I think they share their views with their fund managers. And if they make already negative comments about some country or some area, whatever, those fund managers, when they go back to their desk, they look, what is the level of risk they are with this particular country or this particular area? And if they are over-invested and they are already saying that it's negative, so they try to sell. And the opposite, if they are already given good inputs of that one, they try to buy. So, and that is how that works. So that's why I think it's, I insist on that one. I think knowing a bit, and I think now 50 years since I finished the university, so I think long time, with 10 already been in business. So when you know how that works, so I think the coherence is crucial. And the stability, predictability, and no change of the rule is crucial, because the effects is not for this particular company, this particular business, it's affecting all. So, and that's why I think it's important that for all these things which are related with our commitment with climatic change, is not make a contradictory decisions. We cannot say that we would like to be green, and at the same time we would like to impose taxes for those which are not already polluting. So you cannot move from subsidizing to penalizing. So that's impossible. That's impossible. So I think that is impossible for me to explain to the investors. It's impossible.
So I know you got an incredibly busy agenda, but I thought maybe you could close with the one comment you gave as we were coming in. You talked about a graduation recently, and a professor or a person giving the presentation talked about whether or not about the investment in the planet versus the investment in humanity.
Yeah. So I think I know already, among other things, I'm the chairman of Salamanca University. Salamanca is the oldest university of Spain. It's 800 years old. I think was founded in 1218. And last week we have the honor to nominate Dr. honoris causa to the President of the European Commission, Franz Timmermans. Has already been somebody who has been tremendously committed with all the things related with climatic change. In Salamanca, they are already just in a special chair dedicated to that one, and I think we made himself already Dr. honoris causa. He made a wonderful speech, but I think he used a sentence which touched to me very much, which is, we talk too much, we have to save the planet. No, the planet we save it alone. He talks, we have to save the humanity. It's we, the humanity, the human being, what we are at risk, not the planet. The planet will survive. We don't. We don't. So I think that was for me something which is a very good reflection.
Yeah.
Okay?
Excellent. Well, I very much appreciate you spending the time. I'm sure the audience also appreciates your commitment to and your passion for the utility industry and the utility industry role in sustainability. So
for the climate change.
And for the benefit of all of us.
Okay. So thank you very much to all of you for having this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you very much. So my name is Marco Antonio Chon. I'm the president of the U.S.-Spain Chamber of Commerce, and I'll be very brief closing. It has been a very peculiar and very trying year. We're living through a pivotal moment that is reshaping the world as we know it, and we are acclimated to dealing with uncertainty in almost every sphere of our lives. As the global business landscape continues to be disrupted and reshaped, it is more vital than ever to have these kind of meetings, and this critical moment for leadership cannot be ignored. These events, like the one we have today, are designed to be both efficient and essential, with conversation between leading experts of the most pressing issues of the day, and also in an intimate setting. The Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce effort is created to precisely add value to its members. I would like to commend all the work done by the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce, in particular Gemma Cortijo, Executive Director of the Chamber of Commerce, and the exclusive collaboration also of Cámara of Spain and all the help. With that, keep on trusting that the Spain-U.S. Chamber of Commerce will keep on doing everything we can to do the best for our members. Thank you very much.